in addition to domain-specific knowledge and skills. And this high interest in generic skills there is a various stakeholders that are interested in generic skills, researchers, practitioners, and as well as policy makers. And this has also influenced the research on generic skills. And for example, what kind of research instruments are used in this area. And there are very many kinds of instruments that are used. Mainly previous studies has explored these generic skills using self-reports, and only a limited number of studies applied, for example, performance-based assessment and focused learning generic skills in authentic situations. So the research has been relatively scattered, and the accumulation of research finding is therefore scarce. So there is a need for systematic analysis of the methods and concepts that are utilized in the previous studies. So the present review study aims to contribute theoretical, methodological, and empirical viewpoints on learning of generic skills. And we have 3 research questions. First, from the perspective of student learning in higher education, which generic skills are explored in empirical research and how they are explored? Then, how do higher education students learn or perceive to learn these generic skills during their studies? And thirdly, which factors have been identified to enhance or impede student learning of generic skills? So we combined literature search from different electronic databases, and we carried out to identify peer-reviewed journals from 2014 to 2019, and we used different combination of concepts and phrases such as learning, student learning, and generic skills, as well as higher education or university. So this was the concept that we used to search for these articles. Here you can hopefully see the picture of our selection process. So a total over 900 articles were found. And then through different phases we excluded, for example, theoretical articles and review studies, curriculum analysis, and also articles which explore generic skills from teacher's perspective or employer's perspective. So we really wanted to focus on students' perspectives on learning on generic skills. And through different phases, we ended up a total of 116 articles that we analyzed in more detail in this review study. So quite huge amount of articles to analyze. Here you can see the phases of analysis. So in the first phase we realized that there were 2 types of articles. Those who focused on a set of generic skills, so exploring various generic skills in one research and how students have experienced or perceived to learn them. And then the articles that focused specifically in some generic skills, for example, critical thinking, communication skill, or collaboration skills. Then in the second phase, those studies which focused on a set of generic skills, we analyzed that what kind of skills they have really measured. So we look at the instruments, the items, what kind of generic skills they have measured, and we ended up 17 different categories of generic skills. We will tell more about these in the results section soon. But in the third phase of the analysis, we then analyzed the articles, that what kind of research methods they have used, how students learn these generic skills, and what are these impeding and enhancing factors if these studies have explored these issues. And all of these phases we used qualitative content analysis. And now Auli will continue with the results.
So regarding the first research question, methods and skills that were measured in the articles that we analyzed, we realized that the wide variety of methods were used, but most of the studies were self-report studies and quantitative ones, so researchers utilized questionnaires to investigate generic skills learning. Also, as Tarja briefly said already, we found a huge variation in generic skills that were investigated. And further, as Tarja already told, in the analysis phase, we realized that there were two main categories of articles. First, those that investigated sets of generic skills. Most of the articles were such. And in these papers, the number of skills measured varied from 3 to 89 of generic skills. And the skills were categorized into 17 main categories, and the most often measured skills were professional skills, analytical skills, applying knowledge, communication skills, and collaboration skills. And then we also found those articles that, or studies that focused only on investigating some generic skills, and those articles especially focused on critical thinking, communication skills, collaboration, creativity and problem solving, and self-regulation skills, and also ethical skills. And then regarding our second research question, student learning of generic skills during the studies or their perception of learning, most of the articles that investigated set of generic skills explored students' perceptions how they had learned these skills during the studies. And their perceptions or experiences of learning generic skills varied. Most of the studies found that students perceived that they had learned the skills well, but we also found some studies or some findings that said that students had not learned the skills really well, for example, time management, oral communication, negotiation, coping with stress, creating viable solutions, and meeting deadlines, and these kind of things. Maybe a little bit more complex skills, as you can see from the list. And also some studies found differences in generic skills between the students. And the third research question in which we were interested in enhancing and impeding factors related to learning of generic skills. First, most of the enhancing factors were contextual, related to the teaching and learning environment, and active learning methods that clearly emphasize students' active role and activities, different digital learning environments, games, different kind of online tools, work-based learning, and work-related projects were mentioned as enhancing factors. Also, that kind of things that clearly were related to students as individuals, like students' engagement, deep approach to learning, and interest were also found as enhancing factors. And also the impeding factors were mainly associated with the learning environment. For example, teacher-focused instruction, lack of interaction, and pure working life and practice experiences were the negative factors that we found. And as Tarja mentioned already in the introduction, we want to conclude that we really found the remarkable variation in the definition of the concepts and understanding of concept of generic skills, how they were measured, and we found it quite serious, the situation, because the instruments were so many. On the other hand, it is good that researchers are interested in investigating generic skills, and they developed various kinds of instruments, but it made the review work and also the finding accumulation of research information quite challenging. And also what we were a little bit concerned was that the generic skills were mainly measured with self-report instruments, and when we think about them, and they are skills that people can do or manage, so we thought that maybe this is also an area of development further. And we also thought that longitudinal and intervention studies are needed, but they are challenging designs, so maybe that is the reason why they are not utilized that much. Thank you. And as you see, the paper is published, so you can read the details and see all the reviewed studies from there.
Okay, thank you, Auli and Tarja. Now we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Please be welcome.
That's an excellent initiative, so really timely, because as you said, I mean, the literature is so scattered. My question would be, how did you define skills? Right, you can use narrow definitions focusing on cognitive competencies only. You can use a broader definition, and I thought it was conspicuous that you did not locate studies, for example, epistemic beliefs, that the literature on that, or motivational competencies or emotional competencies. So what's your definition? And I mean, it is implied by the search terms you're using, but then that then defines, I mean, the breadth of the outcome of your search.
Yes, thank you. It was a very good question, and we also, when we do this review study, we really find difficult to that how these original papers, quite many papers are not defined what they mean about these skills. So it was quite, and it was interesting to see that the skills that they were listed in the instruments, we sometimes think that whether they are skills at all or what they are. So this is very important that we, that also these originals are this, and when we explore these generic skills, that we define these skills. In this study, we quite much focused and that how the original studies, how if they have mentioned that these are the generic skills, we then use and use that. How you want to say?
Yes, I was about to say the same as Tarja explained. So we were quite following what the researchers had reported that they measure and how they define generic skills. But in the phase where we grouped, in the analysis phase where we grouped the different skills, so there we really looked that they focus on the similar areas.
Yes, for the first question, we really noticed that there was a huge variation about the quality of the study, and through these different phases we excluded some very many articles from our review because they were so poor quality, or they lack research questions, or they don't, so many things. Yeah. Yeah, so that kind of articles were excluded in the study. The other question was, of course there were some studies which have had categorized those generic skills, but we included them as such in our that we just went through and analyzed what kind of skills they have analyzed in or measured in the studies, and then we just put mark that okay, collaboration skills were mentioned, critical thinking was mentioned, and then we look at the bigger picture when all those articles were covered. So they are in kind of included in our analysis, those categories if the previous studies has has, but we don't. Yeah, so they are taken into account in our analysis if they have used that kind of categories.
I realize that there is a lot of questions. We have time. One short question. You were. Oh, you actually. Yeah. You. Yeah. Please. Yeah.
Moi moi. Yes, thank you. Very good question. This has not been explored actually very much, and we didn't have this viewpoint in our study now, but it would have been possible to look that from which domains the studies come from. There were, I can't say the numbers, but I can say that many of them were from the professional fields, so professions or professional fields, so there might be some link, but I don't have a more detailed answer.
Now, I think we need to move second presentation and welcome Katarina. And this presentation focuses on learning opportunities for generic skills.
Okay, oh, thank you. Okay, also very warm welcome from my side. I'm going to present you the paper by Edith Braun and me regarding the learning opportunities of generic skills in higher education, which are required by graduates on the labor market. I'm going to give you a quick overview on the impact higher education has on employability. Then I'm going to give you a short overview on our theoretical background before I present the research questions, the methods, the sample, and the results, and a brief discussion of those. And I'm going to close with the limitations and implications. First of all, the importance of the match between higher education and the professional career is well documented. In the literature, labor market match exists when the level of education and the skills which graduates acquired correspond with those required for the chosen profession. A good match leads to higher income and a greater satisfaction personally and professionally. Previous studies found that the field of study seems to impact the employment status after graduation, and it seems that there are some fields in which graduates find employment faster and the job matches their qualifications better. For example, fields like economics, technology, or math are known to provide a highly structured curriculum along with discipline-specific knowledge. And for those fields, the literature often expects a good fit and a smooth transition to the labor market. On the other hand, the labor market usability of humanities or arts is often discussed. This may result from the low level of specification, but also may be related to the fact that those fields do not provide training for a specific field or career path. Although institutions of higher education can be seen as autonomous institution and as a social place where education is linked to research, knowledge transfer and cultural self-perception, they also have an important role to play in preparing citizens for the labor market. And right now, the current labor market appears to require employees who are equipped with a broad range of skills like communication or problem-solving skills. To assess those broad generic skills, we use, or the job requirement approach is used. It's a methodological concept which originates in the labor market research, and it's based on 4 assumptions. First, that employees perform tasks that require certain skills, and these tasks vary between occupations. Second, that since a certain fit can be assumed between activities and the skills needed to carry them out, the activities can be understood as a proxy of the skills. And third, that the employed individual is equipped to provide information about their profession and is best able to report on the activities in their everyday work life. The last assumption is that individuals are more likely to report with more accuracy about the frequencies of their performed activities than about the importance of those. So the approach therefore investigates the activities and the frequencies in which they are carried out, and uses those information to identify job-related fields of generic skills which are necessary to perform in a job. As I said, it's an internationally used approach. For example, it's used in a generalized work activities questionnaire, in the UK skills survey, in the PIAC study, or the German National Educational Panel. And our instrument that we use in our study is based on previous work of Braun and Brachem, who built this instrument using those international surveys. And their instrument, they use their instrument on requirements that German graduates encounter on the labor market, and we adapted them for students asking for learning opportunities. The scales stayed mostly the same. We have 10 dimensions. I hope you can see them all. And each dimension was measured with 1, 2, 3 items. And each item starts with the phrase "in my studies," and then is followed by a statement of what students do during their studies. Also, in the middle column, or middle right column, you can see chromas alpha for each dimension, and it ranged between 0.62 and 0.84, which is appropriate considering the small number of items in each dimension. Okay, let's go on to the research questions. We have 2 big questions. First, if the proposed conceptual areas of generic skills, which were developed using the job requirements approach and the graduate survey, can be transferred to measuring learning opportunities for generic skills from students. And second, if there are any profiles for learning opportunities for generic skills in the students' data, and if so, how the fields of study are distributed among those profiles. Our instrument was included in an online survey at one big German university, and our sample consists of 6,982 students who were surveyed between December 2020 and March 21. We performed confirmatory factor analysis and cluster analysis with data 16.1. And here you can see our an overview of our sample. As you can see, most of the students were from humanities, STEM fields, and educational science, and we had more female students in our study than male students. For our first research question, whether the proposed conceptual areas of generic skills developed using the job requirements approach can be transferred to measuring learning opportunities, we performed confirmatory factor analysis, and I hope you can read everything. There were a lot of items, yes. Yeah. We see acceptable to high factor loadings for all items, except one item. It's the 3rd one on the right. In my studies, I evaluate the performance or quality of people, objects, or processes. We have barely acceptable factor loadings. And down to the left, you can see the criteria of the confirmatory factor analysis. And we see that for the mean squared error of approximation, we have a reasonable fit. The standardized mean squared residual, we have a reasonable fit, and the comparative fit index shows an acceptable fit. So overall, our results show that the expected conceptual areas can be transferred to measuring generic learning opportunities for generic skills from students. So are there any profiles for learning opportunities of generic skills in the student's data? And our data, so for that we performed cluster analysis, and our data showed 3 profiles of learning opportunities. Profile 1 and 2 both show overall high learning opportunities and only differed in the learning opportunities for the area of physical performance. And profile 3 overall shows less learning opportunities for generic skills. We see for all 3 profiles that students report high learning opportunities in the areas of using information and communication technology, dealing autonomously with challenging tasks, and planning and organizing of work processes. So how are the fields of study distributed among those profiles? Those are the results of the distribution. We tested the significance using chi-squared and Kramer's V for effect sizes. And as you can see, we have a significant distribution, but the correlation is not that high. And you can see that all fields of study show strengths in all profiles. But nevertheless, we could assign one fields of study to one profile. So humanities, social science, educational science, and psychology could be assigned to profile 1, which leads us to the tendency that those fields of study offer good learning opportunities for generic skills. Profile 2 consists of sports and arts, which also have good learning opportunities for generic skills, especially in the area of physical performance. And profile 3 consists of economics, STEM, agriculture and forestry, nutritional science, and veterinary medicine. Those are seem to be those fields which do not have quite that high learning opportunities for generic skills. So overall, the expected structure of the job requirements approach could be established in the student survey to measure the learning opportunities for generic skills. We found 3 profiles for learning opportunities in the student's data. 2 differed in the amount of learning opportunities for the area of physical performance, and 1 showed overall less learning opportunities. And we saw a distribution of the fields of study among those profiles. To our limitations, our scales have only been applied at one university, so we can make no broader statements about the application of the results in other contexts. We measured the area of physical performance only with one item, but since the fields of study differ in how much physical labor is carried out, this area is still significant, and future research might extend the scale. And even though the distribution of the fields of study among the profiles is significant, the distribution, as you saw, is not that clear. And the question remains whether generic skills are embedded learning goals in higher education, and whether study programs do actively promote them, or if they are more of a byproduct. So lastly, to our implications, the scales provide an empirical basis for the quality management of studies and teaching at higher education. So far, only graduate data and retrospective assessments have been used to draw conclusions about the quality and fit between study programs and the labor market. And we also tested this instrument in the graduate survey, and by using the scales, and especially by using them simultaneously in a student and a graduate survey, a direct reference can be made between current study conditions for learning opportunities of generic skills and the requirements of those faced by graduates. So here are the references, and thank you for your attention.
Any questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, we conducted several cluster analyses. We first, I have to quickly look into my, we first conducted single cluster analyses to identify the breakout cases. Then we conducted Ward's hierarchical cluster analyses. And after that, we did some pretest, and then there were the results came in clusters.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the instruments. Already initially, you had the plan, you had only one item for the physical parameter interaction. Why so? Why didn't you put a bit more items to have better actually, so that you don't have to report the limitation later? And related question, did you also analyze the correlations between the latent variables in the model? You report them now, but isn't it so that some of them are maybe very much correlated with each other, probably overlapping, so that maybe there's something to search in this, because in case of the draw files also, some of the variables, latent variables, were at very similar level actually.
For the first question, I think Braun and Brachem did measure the physical performance with more than one item, and we decided to leave those items out and really focus on the one item, which all in all, at that point we thought gave us all the information we needed. And considering the second question, whether we tested for the correlation between the latent variables, I think we did, but right now I'm not sure.
Well, finally, we did not allow any in the correlation when we did the confirmatory vector analysis. We did not allow to correlate each item to each other. So what we found is that the vector analysis is quite good, I would say, in total, as you can see, one with the indicators. So, but what is for sure true that the latent vectors are correlated to each other. That's for sure. And I don't think they have to be independent of each other.
Sometimes if they are correlated very strongly, then it might indicate that maybe you do not have so many latent variables. That's my only question.
But that's what we did, of course. We tried, well, we used the theoretical input from the previous survey and used the same, but of course we checked for now we have 9 areas or 10 even.
10.
10, but we leave one out because it has just one item.
Okay.
But we also tested like 5 partial structures, stuff like this. So we try to thread the structure, but it worked the best. And also we had the theoretical assumption to use it to be,
Yes. Yeah. We welcome. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question about profiles. Because according to your presentation, profiles were really like these fields, these disciplines, right? Like
Yeah.
measuring skills and not really profile well. Did you do a follow-up study to understand why?
Not yet, not yet. But that's something we're trying to look into, why those fields with the those seems to be the fields with a highly structured curriculum, and we are trying to look into why those fields often report fewer learning opportunities for generic skills.
Just share with you, I had a conversation with one staff, one of these, and then the academic director told me, well, if you talk about employability, right, they are all employed. Their future is guaranteed. Why should we bother? That's one of the conversation I just listened. I don't know whether that's related to, but the final question is
Yeah.
the relationship.
Okay. Very short. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, yeah, so super short. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I should have made that clear. The students didn't rank their skills or their competencies in those areas. They ranked how often they do activities like I train, teach, or educate other people, or I plan timelines. So they ranked that from.
Yeah, and actually this same is found, for example, in Tarja's studies, that students have difficulties in recognizing the skills, even though these skills are taught as a part of their curriculum. Yes, but I'm sorry, we need to go forward, and the next presentation is about critical thinking and development of critical thinking.
Do you mind if I take the chair? No. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, I think it's okay. Can you listen to me okay? Yes? Okay, good afternoon. My name is Inmaculada Martinez Garcia, and I'm going to present this work with my colleague, Enrique Alastor, that is sitting just there, and Tine Nielsen. That she excused that she's not here today, and she was the presenting author, but we will try our best to do our best. So this research is called Exploring Changes in Domain-Specific Critical Thinking, Psychology Student Statistics-Related Critical Thinking. So first of all, we would like to introduce our topic, and in this research, we thought that we have found in the literature that there is a growing interest in to incorporate critical thinking in higher education, as or the previous she said before, we have been talking here before. So it's important to include critical thinking in the curriculum in order to train students to have the competences that enables them to be in society in the future. We find in the literature two levels of implementation of critical thinking, as you can see here. It's critical thinking as domain or subject specific. It's the one that we are going to develop today. It is implemented in one subject, for example, or in one area of knowledge. And then we have critical thinking as a generic or general skill that we have, for example, in some universities, some programs that incorporates independent courses about critical thinking in general, but they are not related with a specific subject. On the other hand, we also find that critical thinking is a skill that is very relevant in the first year university students, because when they come to the university, they find sometimes we find that they don't have the ability to use higher order thinking skills. So we find that it's a very interesting issue. And then the third issue to take in mind is that students in statistics related critical thinking. So there are lack of studies that study domain specific critical thinking as we call it natural development, because they don't have like a specific training course on that. So in this research, as I said before, we focus in this kind of statistics specific critical thinking. We mean that students that are in their first year in the first semester of psychology, and they enroll in statistics as a general subject, and we study and we investigate whether if this student they have changes. They change from the first semester to the second semester, as this subject is the whole year. These students are in a full-time bachelor degree in psychology, and in the curriculum of this subject, we have learning aims related with critical thinking, and also assessment criteria. Also, another aim is to investigate the psychometric properties of the scale we have been using. However, we will not focus on that today, but you will find information about that in the article that we'll show at the end of the presentation. This is an exploratory research, so we have some expectations. Our expectations are related to three fields. We call it fields. At baseline, we think that, at the beginning of the research, we thought that a student that perceive their math knowledge as inadequate for learning statistics, this student would be less inclined towards statistics-related critical thinking. Then we have those students that are not expecting to need statistics in their future employment, that also we thought they were less inclined towards statistics-related critical thinking. We will see that we ask in the next slide. We will see that we ask about that in the questionnaire. Then another thing that we will focus is in the changes from baseline to follow-up. With that, it means if there is this increase in critical thinking in the first and second semester, if there is this, if we can find an increase in all of the students. And then we studied how the subgroups develop. These subgroups that we were talking about before, depending on how they perceive their mathematical knowledge and how they perceive if they need or their expectations in how they will need statistics in the future. So after that expectations that we have presented, we will see the instruments. So as I have said before, we have used an adapted validated version of critical thinking scale from Pinterich. Is the MSLQ. However, we did a previous study doing a Rush model in Danish and Spanish research. So we selected 3 items that were the items that had like we removed 2 items of the 5 of the previous scale because of the lack of content validity. So the items we asked, we selected were these three ones. So we asked the student how often they found questioning things, or how often they heard or read things in the statistics course, to decide if they were convincing. Then we asked them about the theory and interpretation or conclusion in the statistics course, what they feel about the readings, and how they tried, if they try to decide if there is good supporting evidence, this theory. And the third thing is they have to answer is whenever they read or hear an assertion or a conclusion in this statistics course, if they think about alternatives. There is a frequency from 1 to 5. And then we have additional questions about the gender and age, demographic data, and then the two things I told you before in the expectations, their perception about their maths knowledge for learning statistics, and then how they expect, if they expect they would need statistics in their future employment. So these are our independent variables. Depending on that, we did the analysis. As I have said before, the participants were full-time psychology students. They were in the first year of bachelor degree, just arrived into the university, and we collect data in 2 semesters, a long statistics course in a Danish university. So it was in the first semester and in the second semester. We did a paper pencil survey. We asked the lecturer before, and all the students were informed, and it was voluntary participation. We collect data from 2 years. So we have here, as you can see, 2 cohorts. So we have a total of 336 students at the baseline, and we can divide them in cohort 1 and cohort 2. And in the second semester, we made a follow-up in the 2 cohorts, and it was completed by 270 students. 165 where they match to the baseline. As you can see here at the end of the slide, this matching rate were determined because sometimes we have the dropout or new enrollments, for example. On them, we could match the students also because we asked them for the ID, and also because sometimes just by chance we have interlessons the students, so sometimes we didn't. The mean age is 22.7 years old, and most of them, as you can see, they were female students. We can find here the same here in Spain, most of them female. As I said before, we measured the psychometric properties of the scale, and then we measured the difference in critical thinking at the baseline, taking into account the independent variables, this perception about maths and the expectation about the future employment, and also gender and age. And then the assessment of the change in critical thinking. So we saw the baseline and then the change. And also we measured how the baseline and the follow-up, the first and second semester comparison, fit the Rush model. As a result, we can see, well, we have 3 results. The first one is about the difference at the baseline that we called before. As we can see here, this happened, about the math knowledge to learn statistics, it happened as it was expected. So a student that perceived the math knowledge was inadequate were less inclined towards statistics-related critical thinking. And also happened somehow as expected with the students with the need in the future, with the student that expect or not, didn't expect to need statistics in the future. Also, they were less inclined towards statistic critical thinking. Then regarding the changes from the baseline to the follow-up, the comparison between first semester and the second semester, we can see here the large absolute individual change in critical thinking. As we can see here, we can see the people that didn't change, the change in the positive, they increased the critical thinking or decreased the critical thinking from one semester for the other one. And the last one shows the difference at the baseline depending on the subgroups. So at overall level, we can find there are no changes, as you see. We have, on the other hand, we can see there are tendencies, for example, between male and female. There are opposite effects, as we can see here, and also between students' perception of maths knowledge. So this makes us think about what can we do in the future, future research to analyze that. So we can see only small effects on subgroups of students. So after the research, we have some limitation and some strengths. We can see about the sample size. It was small and it did not allow interaction to see, to explore and see interaction effects, stratifying for more than one variable. Then the scale is very small and it's only 3 items. But however, it was an excellent measure, so it was good. And we find that results contributes knowledge on the natural development, this natural development that we talked before, with no teaching, specifically in critical thinking. About the research method, we think that maybe we can apply this, it should be necessary, maybe a qualitative research with more detailed information about what's happening in the class with the teacher.
it's not a very easy concept. And concept is specifically difficult because in some countries, like in USA, scientific refers very strongly to natural sciences, which means that scientific thinking is about like controlling variables in physics tests or something like that. And that is the history of scientific thinking studies. Like Diana Kuhn, many of you know maybe Diana Kuhn studies have been conducted mainly on children's natural science learning. Like if you have a pendulum and you have a string there and a weight and you give some movement to it, how fast it goes, and the children have to make some judgments about the physical phenomena. So this is kind of a difficulty that I have been wondering that how can we call something generic to all disciplines? Is there something that we can call scientific thinking? And for those who come from Nordic or Germany or European cultures, you know, for example, German word Wissenschaft, which is something that can be translated as scientific thinking, but it's kind of a wider concept or system of doing research. So this was my starting point for the study, that how can we explain the difficulties the students are facing, or the difficulties that the graduates we have and they are going to the working life, why can't they solve some problems, and why is it hard for them to understand which research to use in their questions and so on. So this was the starting point, and this was our conception of scientific thinking, and we actually have published a book a few years ago about the same topic by me and Kieran Baloo, and the book name is Redefining Scientific Thinking for Higher Education, and subtitle is Higher Order Thinking, Evidence-Based Reasoning and Research Skills. I'm happy to send my slides to you if you want. So then I had some empirical studies, some kind of little showcases here, not the whole studies to show you. There was study A and B, and in study A we went to look at some of our data to see how university teachers, who are in the center of educating our students, how they perceive scientific thinking, and we asked them to write first in the study A. First, write what they think scientific thinking is, and in Finnish language, scientific thinking is something that is this broader concept, so we don't have to explain it first to them. And the members of our study, the participants, came from all faculties of our universities, so they were quite broad participant list. And when we now especially went to see, are there some mentions of generic skills, we noticed that yes, there are kind of teachers were describing something that are very generic skills, like understanding how science works, and let me see if I now don't have my glasses. There's a problem of not seeing this. Like thinking skills and skills to continuously develop one's own thinking and understanding own scientific conceptions. So there were notions of generic skills that I think that can be applied to all disciplines, not only their own discipline. And in study B, we asked small groups to discuss about the same topic, and the result was similar. They were describing quite many things that I think that can be called generic scientific skills. So our kind of a conclusion was that yes, there can be found these, but now I don't have anything to draw because I had some figures I would like to show you. Well, we have actually 3 figures here. The first one was about the topic that came out in your study. What are the generic and domain-specific skills? And we have this kind of 4-section table, kind of a cross table about scientific skills and other skills. Like we can I think when we are talking about scientific thinking, we can okay. So anyway, the first table is quite simple. It is about generic skills in science and generic skills in other life. So that is the first the first lines, and then we have domain-specific skills, and that is in the other cross-sectional ways. So basically, we have 4. We claim that there are 4 types of skills that are generic scientific skills, and then domain-specific scientific skills. Then we have generic skills like in other areas, like in everyday life, and domain-specific skills. That's okay. That's okay. Don't worry about it. Then one extra thing that we noticed in teachers' ponderings was that it came up both in their written texts and also in their group discussion, was epistemic understanding. So we noticed that those teachers who were most aware of what their students should learn, they brought up issues concerning epistemic thinking. And now, speaking of the generic and specific, we also had a figure about scientific epistemic understanding and generic epistemic understanding. So meaning that epistemic understanding in generic is that you understand, for example, that in your everyday life how you perceive something and how your friends are dealing with information and so on. But in scientific epistemic level, you can divide them to domain specific and domain general, meaning that if the teachers understand how their students are learning, they need to have both domain specific on their own area and domain generic information to be able to guide their students to learn those things that are kind of generic to all disciplines. And this is because they go to the working life. And in the working life, they will have to collaborate with people from many areas, and they need to build collaboratively knowledge about new things and solve problems. So they have to, the teachers have to understand how their students think and how they understand science and how they understand how research is done, how new knowledge in the world is kind of constituted and built, and to guide their students both in these generic and specific areas. I think that's enough now.
Thank you, Mari. Questions or comments?
Well,
Oh.
your presentation, we not needed the slideshow.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that when there is expert knows what to talk. Yes. Yeah.
So it's not working, is it? No. It's. It's not working? Okay, because it's already. It's green.
It works now.
I think it does.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The good thing about being a discussion, you don't present any results, you just present some thoughts. So I'm not that much depending on my slides, it's just remembering my thoughts and reconstruction, but I'm happy to just share and discuss with you now. When I was asked to discuss the symposium, I was very happy to agree. So thank you for organizing this symposium on generic skills. And I know a lot of you already for years because we are doing research in how to teach, how to support generic skills in higher education, how to define it. So when I also read your paper about the literature review, so thank you very much about that. And I really liked your result where you made a differentiation saying, you know, there is some literature looking at a set of skills, and there is also literature looking at a specific skills like critical thinking, as you do. So that was one important point saying, you know, we can have a broad view at generic skills or a very specific view on generic skills. And you're also pointing out that one result is that teachers, so teachers in higher education, need to balance between two levels. I think that's what you said in the very last, between knowledge and skills. And that's also important result, in my opinion, if you're looking at a literature review and doing a meta-analysis. So coming to the collaboration between two nations, actually it's between Denmark and Spain, so that's what I liked. It's a longitudinal and cross-national comparison. So, but you're very, I would like to say, narrow at what you're looking at. So you're using one scale, 3 items, but you're doing it on a longitudinal study, and you find the changes, and you're looking on the changes. And we all know that we definitely need more research looking at a longitudinal perspective. How does it change? What is the impact of higher education on skills? So coming to Katharina's and mine presentation, and I think I just put up the graphic again, saying, you know, using a cluster analysis, we found 3 different clusters, and we could match some discipline to some point to the cluster analysis. So I think the important point is also this theoretical impact on it, because we know that a lot of studies use self-reports on competencies. But there's a good reason to use it, because if you want to survey as many people as possible, you usually use questionnaires, right? So if you want to compare big samples, you have to ask, how can we improve the self-reports? Just instead of saying self-reports are not good enough, we can say, how can we improve it? And yes, I mentioned already, and the last one of Mari's, even if we didn't find your slide, I had the opportunity to look at it because you sent it in time. And I think the point you're making is saying, you know, there's generic skills or scientific skills which are domain specific, but also more general. And what you just mentioned while you were presenting, saying, you know, the people from Germany might know the word Wissenschaft, and I'm from Germany, so I know it well. And I think that's an important point, because maybe you pointing out there might be differences between the disciplines, but there might be also differences between the higher education systems. So if you're looking, because Finland and Germany has some similarity in their educational system, we might have the same understanding of scientific. But if we go to the close east, like Korea or Japan, who are depending more on the labor market, it might change. So that's what I'm missing at the moment. We have some studies doing cross-national comparison, but we don't do it maybe enough already. So we have to bring together the different higher education systems. And I know that the socialists, as Katharina is one, they bringing into the macro perspective. So not only looking at, you know, how do we learn, which is very important, no question, but we have to contextualize it even more. And I know the special issue Heidi and Tara are editing at the moment have included some international comparison or some paper from other nations. So, but going a little bit on a bigger level, I think what you all introduced very well is the reasons why we are looking at generic skills, because, you know, we are living in a world which is changing quite fast at the moment. So we all ask ourselves, how can we support our students to fit the nowadays changes and transformations, and how can we prepare them? So as you said, generic skills is one of the biggest aim and key aims of higher education. I think if we look at the research so far, we can, at least I would state, in the last decades, we have improved in theory-based understanding of generic skills. We have a better definition in comparison to what we had like 10 years or 20 years ago, and we have a better methodology. We have advanced methods, what I really appreciate a lot. We are assessing the perception of students, and we're also very good in assessing specific skills using like performance-based testing or different alternative assessments approach, which was not a topic today, but we are aware that there are some changes going on. I have one table I cannot show you, but I think it's a simple table. What I thought, looking through the presentation, we have the differentiation between the specific generic skills and the areas or the set of generic skills. And we try to assess the areas or the set of generic skills with a questionnaire. And if we're looking at specific generic skills, we are using alternative assessment like performance-based assessment. So there are lags when we are looking at a set of generic skills, we are still depending on questionnaires. And the other way around, if we're looking at specific generic skills, what I said already, I think we can still think about how can we improve the self-reports. So I think that might be some areas we can improve our own research. And I had some discussion with some colleagues ago, so I already mentioned the transformation of our society, asking what contribution can we make as a higher education system to support our students. So in my opinion, it's not a simple question at all. So asking what are the generic skills we should suppose and support in higher education, it's not a question, what's my favorite skill? What would I like to teach? It's not about my expertise. It's about what students will need like 10, 20, and 50 years from now on. So that's a very normative question, to be honest. It's not a neutral question. But I think that's also a point we have to think about it. And we all work in staff development, and we know that it's not easy, even if we can identify the competences we will need in 20 and 30 years, it will not be easy to teach our teacher to support this generic skill. So that's just my thoughts. Thank you for sharing my thoughts. It's not all based on empirical results, as you can tell, but I'm happy to continue the discussion with you and with the presenter. Thank you.
Your ideas, and I really agree with your ideas that we need more research, we need more the better tools and measurements that we use, and I think that there is room for performance-based assessment, good one of these kind and more authentic measurements, but at the same time the better self-reports, as you said. Yeah. Any comments? Yeah, please.
Comment specifically to the first presentation. Is that the enhancing factors you identified in your analysis pretty much similar to what we see with the studies where it's not the lyric skills that are measured, but just learning in general. Students having a deep approach to learning and those factors. So that's interesting. So I wonder if in order to teach the lyric skills, you just need to teach better.
Good question.
I think that this is a very good point that you made. And my impression is that we don't actually know very much that what are the teaching methods or assignments that really enhance deeply and thoroughly students' generic skills. Articles that reported something related to enhancing or improving factors where most of them were actually some kind of experiments, or like we tried this kind of course design and let's see what happens. This type of study, so they were not designed especially for measuring learning of generic skills, or is this pedagogy or method actually improving or enhancing, and this goes back to the point that Martin you made, that what was actually the quality of the papers.
And I also want to hear some thoughts on this is the appropriate moment to do that?
Mhm.
And
No.
also,
No.
yeah, when all the time. All the time, yeah. That's yeah, because I think that like here I hear all the recommendations about still
Mhm.
I wonder because sometimes we see that students they really develop something and that is not about faculty, it's really about the test and the quality of their thinking. So I also saw the article about the psychology, how they measure critical thinking by using the questions. And then really do like they are more limited answers, and the students can express themselves. Actually, I personally find that this can give more information than see sentences and numbers. Yeah. So, of course, we all need all kinds of mixed methods to validate all kinds of findings. But I'm thinking whether this is more in the future, we can consider to do more quality tests. Understand really what changes the students make in their thinking, in their performance, and of course, in their self-reporting. I don't know whether you
So I think that the reason why we suggested that we should have more like intervention studies and not only science. So as you said, the skills development is pretty slow, and it would be interesting to see what happens during higher education studies, and since the beginning and at the end, and when students go to the working life. And we may systematically design some interventions to enhance some generic skills learning, so what happens. You are right.
continue with all of your questions and pedagogical issues, I think that we have to raise here is a curriculum and competencies in curriculum. While theory skills are mostly well, I think they're not paid enough attention in curricula, and that is one of the reasons. So it's not about only about how to teach them, but just to make them visible. And there, as I said, it's important to make research in this area because research brings it showable what is to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Mm. Mm. Mhm. 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 Mhm.
For example, in the context of critical thinking, it is my main research area, and in that, if you look at the definition of critical thinking, there is actually three dimensions or elements of what are needed: skills, knowledge, and dispositions. And dispositions actually includes like self-regulation and effort, and I think that one that makes this very complex area of generic skills, that each of these, for example, the specific skills, they have own theories, own traditions to do that research, and then we have like this general as well, and that revenue study showed that there is huge variation within that field, and I think this is a very good question. I think we might in the future, but I think nowadays, when every researcher adds own definition, we don't have some kind of coherent picture. If we don't do work together and try to define,
One comment in addition to this is that you all know that these are very much favored in educational policy documents. And it is one of the quite, I think, big reasons that influences on the research of this field. So that we, as researchers, are influenced by OECD reports and this kind of policy discussions. And we tend to take into account, consciously or unconsciously, those things and follow the lists that are prepared that students should know and be able to, instead of being purely influenced by our empirical research and what we find and what we based on that know what we think.
I know we are at the end, but I really like your first comment about, we need to look for a longer time. If we are looking at higher education, we are talking about complex skills, so it's not learned within 2 weeks. And I actually think we need research who are looking at the outcome of higher education. So we are interested in what level they come in and what level they come out. And to be honest, I don't care how they learn it, how students, what methods work, but do higher education in total work. So I think that's a very important thought you just mentioned, and we really need to, and that's why we need good measurement to measure the complex skills. So, and we need to define what skills are the aims of higher education. I think that there were a lot of comments on that, what competences are these. So that's my, thank you very much for your discussion.
Thank you.